Are we glad that there's peace? I don't think there's peace. Hi, I'm Bishop Robert Stearns with the Tabernacle in Buffalo, New York, and Eagles Wings. Check us out at eagleswings.org, your home for Jerusalem-centered Christianity. And for the past 32 years, I've been traveling to Israel, interacting with Israel's leaders, its faith communities, and the everyday person on the street. Jew, Arab, Christian, Muslim, Druze, Baha'i, all the mosaic that makes up the pluralistic democratic state of Israel. And every week, we bring you the Israel Frontline update, where we look at the major headlines of the week and we go a little bit deeper. We look at them also from a Christian and faith perspective. So I'm glad you dropped by today. Two big stories this week that we are looking over. Number one is the ceasefire with Hezbollah, the ceasefire with Lebanon that has just been declared. This is a multifaceted situation. There's a lot of different ways to look at this. So let's dive into that right now. First of all, we have to understand a little bit of the context and the history. Lebanon, for many, many years, was a model nation of religious pluralism and genuine tolerance and genuine ability to get along in various faith aspects. Lebanon very beautifully held together three primary religious traditions. Number one being the Muslim tradition, number two being the Catholic tradition, and number three being the Maronite Catholic tradition, which is similar to Catholic, but it is not Roman Catholic. It is the Maronite Christian tradition. And that has a very strong following in Lebanon. And so for years and years and years, Lebanon lived in peaceful coexistence, mostly with Israel. And within its borders, there was a genuine sense of cooperation. Several years ago, Hamas and other radicalized Islamic ideologies began to find a foothold in Lebanon. And so the Muslim community became increasingly radicalized on one hand. And then on the other hand, you began to see proxy armies, most notably Hezbollah, backed by Iran, come into Lebanon and begin to actually kind of become a separate government and a separate militia to the Lebanese army itself. So you had a nation that was just deeply fractured and divided. And all of the tensions with Israel began to increase. Now, right before then, what you saw was a massive, massive migration of Lebanese Christians out of Lebanon. Now, this is very important that we look at this. Right here in my direct neighborhood, our dry cleaners and tailors, all in this area, huge Lebanese Christian family, the Cheban family. There is a huge chain of Lebanese Christian restaurants all over the area where we live. Huge Lebanese Christian family. There is a computer goods store in our area. Huge Lebanese Christian family. So right now we see this. These Lebanese Christians were not leaving the Middle East because of Israel. These Lebanese Christians were forced out of their homes out of not only centuries, millennia. The Maronite and Catholic Christians have lived in Lebanon many, many centuries, 1,000 years, 1,200 years, earliest church, and they're forced out by an increasingly radicalized Islam. So what happens? The nation is drained of the Christian population who no longer feel safe or increasingly targeted and persecuted. Yes, there are some churches and some leaders who are propped up and remain for show. We've seen that out of the playbook before, right? In the former Soviet Union. We see that in China with the Three Self Church, right? Totalitarian regimes will always give a glossed over perspective of human rights by propping up token churches or token Christian leaders. But nevertheless, the main population is being drained away. And as the main population lessens, the vacuum is filled with an increasingly radicalized Islam. Folks, this is what we saw in Lebanon. This is what we are seeing in Bethlehem. We've seen this tragically in Bethlehem even since I have been there. When I started going the first mayor of Bethlehem that I met, going back many, many years, was Mayor Frej. To this day, I have a little olive wood creche presented to me by Mayor Frej when I did all of the music in Manger Square in Bethlehem on Christmas Eve. You know, CNN and BBC cuts to Manger Square on Christmas Eve. Well, one year that was me. And we produced the music, and I sang in Bethlehem Square and Christian. And Mayor Frej met with us and presented us with this beautiful manger. Back then, Bethlehem was easily 60, 70, 80% Christian. Today, less than 10%. So now back to Lebanon and the ceasefire. Why is this complicated? Well, on one hand, there's pros and cons, positives and negatives. So let's break it down. On the positive side, you could argue this two ways. Number one, you can argue that really the Biden administration has, in a sense, forced Israel's hand on this because of the increasing threats that they're giving to withholding military aid and withholding the vital support Israel needs, even in the last weeks of the Biden administration. So Biden wants to go out with some kind of a win that he brokered a ceasefire deal, but he's doing it by applying undue pressure on Israel and not allowing our greatest ally the kind of military support that it needs to finish this job, even though obviously the American people have spoken resoundingly. That's one aspect. The second aspect, on the other hand, is that Hezbollah, knowing that a Trump presidency is weeks away, is probably much more willing to accept the terms of a ceasefire because they know that once Trump is in office, there will not be nearly as conciliatory an administration in Washington for them to deal with. So you have Biden wanting to score this last win on the public stage. You have him applying undue pressure to our ally Israel to get it done. And you have Hezbollah probably willing to accept this because they're scared of an incoming Trump presidency. And so here's really, in my opinion, this is a short-term win and a long-term loss. Because how many times in the past has Israel had to deal with Hezbollah's increasing strength in Lebanon, fueled by Iran? And so now they're going to take a break. They're going to accept this ceasefire, which simply is going to give them 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, 30 months, mark my words, to regroup, to get more supplies, to train more jihadi, suicide-minded bombers, to radicalize, the jihad, and to prepare for the next attack. Can you imagine if the Western allies had allowed Hitler to live and allowed the Nazi Party to continue? Put that scenario in place. Put that mindset in place. Can you imagine if we decided to, listen, let's negotiate with bin Laden. Let's, come on, let's negotiate with bin Laden. Let's, World Trade Center bombing, okay, but we've got to, coexist. What are you talking about? No, your enemy, if they are not reasonable and do not come to the table with reasonable willingness to negotiate and come into genuine coexistence, if your enemy is dedicated not to the peaceful coexistence of the human family, but dedicated to jihad, then you got to take them at their word because they demonstrated over and over again. So, Lebanon, that's the situation in Lebanon. Are we glad that there's peace? I don't think there's peace. I think there's a momentary cessation in the conflict. I think that Lebanon is a sad shell of its former self. I think it is increasingly being taken over by Iran-backed Hezbollah mindset, which is identical to Hamas in Gaza. And so Israel is facing this stranglehold from the south and the north. Again, a nation smaller than New Jersey, facing these threats on both borders. I guess it's good that there's a momentary cessation. Maybe a Trump presidency is going to force. Now, here is what's good. And this is where we need to direct our prayers and our focus. What is good is that Saudi Arabia is in play. There are strong indications that Saudi Arabia wants to move into the modern world, and the modern world accepts the Jewish and democratic state of Israel in its current borders with a negotiated settlement on Judea and Samaria. And whatever is going to happen in Gaza, some type of solution for Gaza. Peace and prosperity for the Palestinian people, but not at the expense of the Jewish and democratic state of Israel. Folks, that's the entire Middle East conflict in one sentence. And I told you this a few days ago, and I hope you were listening, because this is word games. These are the word games that the enablers of Hamas and Hezbollah, under the guise of, these are Christians, so-called Christians, and they play word games with you. They say, of course we want a Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel. That's what they'll say. Doesn't that sound good? Doesn't that sound like Jesus? All we want is a Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel. They will not say the Jewish state of Israel or the Jewish and democratic state of Israel. Israel is unwilling, as it should be, to give up the Jewish character and nature of the state of Israel. Why? Because we just saw in Amsterdam, the need for the state of Israel to come to the defense of its Jewish citizens. And so Israel is not willing to accept the right of return, which now the numbers are absurd. We're now on our third generation of refugees and returnees. Yes, there were the low end, 400,000, the high end, 600, 700,000 Palestinian refugees. Guess what? At the exact same time, there were hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Jewish refugees fleeing Iraq, fleeing Egypt, fleeing Iran, fleeing Yemen. Shlomo and Zila Ayal, our tour guides in Israel, their parents were Jewish refugees fleeing Iraq. And they came and they built a new life for themselves. That's what you do. You don't allow yourself to be kept in limbo for 3 generations and tell your grandchildren that they're going to go back to their home in fill in the blank. But this is what UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency, and the UN and the radicalized Islamic world has allowed to be perpetrated in the minds of these 3rd generation refugees. You have trapped them in eternal victimhood. You have robbed them of a future and a hope. Tomorrow, release the hostages and put forth a proposition for a demilitarized Palestinian state in Gaza. Its security will be guaranteed by Egypt and Jordan. And you're done. You'll figure out Judea and Samaria. This is not overly complicated unless you play word games. And you talk about, of course, we want a Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel. But you're not being honest. You're lying. So, is it a Jewish state? That's the question that they will never answer. All right, that is it on Lebanon. Benjamin Netanyahu, reacting to his arrest warrant, courageously says we will not yield to pressure from the International Criminal Court. This is a joke. Where is the arrest warrant for Putin? Where is the arrest warrant for Kim Jong-un? Where is the arrest warrant for Bashar al-Assad? Where is the arrest warrant for leaders of ISIS and Boko Haram and the Taliban? And you're going to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu. By the way, the same week, Israel went in and vaccinated 97% of Gaza's inhabitants against polio. Yeah, because this is the genocidal nature of the Jewish people and the genocidal nature of the Jewish state. Folks, you need to spend 24 hours in Israel. 24 hours talking to a random dozen, 2 dozen Israeli citizens. By the way, Jew, Arab, Druze. And you find invariably the character of these people. These are people who want peace. These are people who are rational. These are people who are logical. These are people who are not asking for expansionistic, territorial increase. They're just trying to live their lives and stop being bombed and stop being murdered and raped and kidnapped and tortured. What can you do right now? You can go to Bonhoeffer.org, all right? Right there behind me, Bonhoeffer.org. Free bracelets, free stickers. T-shirts aren't free, but they're at cost. We want to get these T-shirts out there. We want to seize this moment, this Bonhoeffer moment. Bonhoeffer said, silence in the face of evil is evil itself. Not to act is to act. So I am calling upon Christians, Jews, moderate Muslims, Hindus, people of goodwill who believe that all the human family is created in the image of God. All the human family is worthy of respect and dignity. And we are our brother's keeper. We need to stand against the twin threats of radicalized Islam, which is hijacking our world, and radicalized wokeism that is enabling and abetting radicalized Islam. It's your turn to speak up. Become a partner with me today, eagleswings.org. I need you to partner. No amount is too small. $10 a month, $5 a month, whatever you can do. We are growing a global force, a global movement of Jerusalem-centered Christianity that fights for the rights of all people everywhere to live their lives in freedom. Listen, in the garden, God did not have robots. In the garden, God gave people freedom of choice. And that is what we believe, that every human being has the right to choose to live their life according to their beliefs. Dr. Martin Luther King said this. He said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so we've got to unite and lift our voice. Thank you for dropping by. Hit the share button, the like button, the subscribe button. I'll see you next week on the Israel Frontline Update.